From the unnatural union of a human and a fiend, the resulting offspring is born evil, wicked in demeanour and devil-like in appearance. Such a child is called a Cambion. Ahoy everyone, I'm Nazir North and welcome to the channel. You're watching the Monster Manual Breakdown, and in this video we are covering the Cambion from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We're going to discuss their lore and nature and how you can narratively insert a Cambion into your campaign. And then we're going to run through its stat block in detail and talk about its combat tactics and how you can effectively use it on the battlefield. Lastly, we'll be doing a little bit of homebrewing, so make sure to stick around until the end if you want to see a Cambion variant with some interesting demonic ancestry. Let's get started. A Cambion's parents are two different species from two different planes of existence. One, a humanoid, normally a human, but this could be an elf, dwarf, or even a goblin or kobold. The other is a fiend, normally a succubus or incubus, but this could in theory be any fiend, devil or demon that could mate with a humanoid, though there might be some challenging anatomy to deal with that makes this very unlikely for many creatures in the fiend category. Let's not dwell too long on that though. Cambions inherit features from both of their parents, and the example given to us in the Monster Manual is still generally human in shape, but has many of those classic devil-like features: red skin, wings, a tail, and horns. For another example of a Cambion in media, you can look at Hellboy, who has a demon father and a human mother, and has many of those same devilish features we see in the artwork in the Monster Manual. Both Hellboy and the Dungeons & Dragons example of the Cambion are of course inspired by European mythology, although Cambions in mythology generally just looked like regular humans. It was their evil behaviour that set them apart, not their appearance. Okay, and back to the Monster Manual example, and I do think that's what this is in the Monster Manual, just an example of a stereotypical Cambion. You can quite easily imagine a myriad other forms Cambions could take if you mixed up their parentage a bit. We are even told in the Monster Manual entry of another type of Cambion that has jet black skin, cloven hooves, and six-fingered hands. Very different to the artwork shown. Continuing with the entry, it tells us that Cambions are naturally evil. Ruthless, wicked, and power-hungry. If they are raised in the material realm with their humanoid parents, they have a tendency to become tyrants or gang leaders, forcing others into their service to gain power. However, those raised in the lower planes, such as the Abyss or the Nine Hells, may end up as servants or envoys to more powerful fiends, maybe even their fiendish mother or father. And even as servants, all Cambions will still have that aspiration for greatness, and will likely always be looking for that next opportunity to rise up the hierarchy and clamber their way higher up the food chain. So, given what we now know about the Cambion's lore, how can you place one in your campaign setting? And how can you make an adventure or plot arc around them for your players to engage with? I think the Cambions actually make great villains at low to mid-level play around tiers 1 or 2. That's when the party are between levels 1 and 10. Their ambition, high charisma, and lack of empathy would make them excellent politicians. Particularly, I would focus on the type of Cambion that was born and raised on the material plane, and has grown into their fiendish tendencies as they've gotten older. Their birth may have been considered an omen by their mortal human communities. They probably would have had a very tough childhood, but their innate cruelty and malice would serve them well. They would force and manipulate others to serve them, and they would grow into the role of a criminal mastermind ringleader, or maybe a politician of some kind, orchestrating various evil schemes. You can even imagine an older Cambion as a godfather-like character, a gangster or boss of the mob. Maybe a Cambion would run things from behind the scenes, disguising their true nature, or maybe they would brazenly be showing off their fiendish form, using it to intimidate others. Either way, I see them as the kingpin, with a number of humanoid followers to carry out their bidding. And this is likely where they come into conflict with the adventuring party. The Cambion's activity is not just going to be status quo, business as usual, static activity. They have plans and schemes and ambitions. Perhaps the Cambion and their followers are planning something big. A heist, a revolution, an assassination, and the party need to stop it. An adventure arc could go from first foiling the plan and then identifying exactly who this kingpin is. They may not even know that it's a Cambion pulling the strings until later on. The party then works their way through the Cambion's criminal organisation, maybe infiltrating and taking down a few gang hideouts along the way until there is a final confrontation with the Cambion gang leader. And then if that's not enough for you, you could add an escalation here as well. Perhaps the Cambion's fiend parent, a succubus, incubus, or a more deadly fiend, joins the fray. Maybe they step in to protect their child from the party, or after killing the Cambion, the party discover it was the parent that was actually pulling the strings all along, and that's who they really need to bring down. Overall, the motive for the Cambion as a leader is going to be fairly straightforward. They want to gain power and influence. Motives for parents could be a bit more complicated if we bring that fiend parent into play, but their motive is more likely to revolve around corrupting mortal souls into committing evil acts, so that their souls will then get sent to the lower planes upon their death. Whichever route you go down in terms of villain motives, their activities are almost certainly going to put them in the firing line of an adventuring party. If you've got any other good story ideas for a Cambion, drop them in the comment section. Or if you've already used the Cambion as a big villain before, let me know, how did it go? Next, let's take a look at the Cambion's stat block. It's a medium-sized fiend and its given alignment is anywhere on the evil spectrum, so it can be chaotic evil, neutral evil, or lawful evil. In terms of its defences, it's got a high armour class of 19. This is calculated from its armour, scale mail, plus the Cambion's charisma modifier. This is due to the Cambion's unique trait, Fiendish Blessing, that lets it add its charisma modifier to its AC. It's got an okay hit point pool at an average of 82, and that's not a lot for a challenge rating 5 monster, but it does have some very good saving throws, with proficiency in strength, constitution, intelligence and charisma, and it has some good damage resistances. It's resistant to your main elemental damage types, as well as poison and non-magical weapon attacks. Altogether, the Cambion is going to be pretty resilient to both direct attacks and saving throws against spells and other effects. The one gap in its defences that I've spotted, however, is its wisdom. It has only a +1 modifier to its wisdom and no proficiency in wisdom saving throws. And wisdom is a very, very common saving throw from spells and other effects. On movement and mobility, it's got your standard walking speed of 30 feet and a flying speed of 60 feet. Its ability scores are very good across the board, that wisdom with a 12 being its lowest score. It's got some skill proficiencies too: deception, intimidation, perception and stealth. All the kinds of things that make sense knowing what we know about the nature of the Cambion. It's got dark vision to a range of 60 feet, fairly standard for a lot of monsters, and it can speak common as well as abyssal and infernal, the languages of the Abyss and 9 Hells respectively. The Cambion has some spell casting, though these are mostly utility spells, not really combat spells. It has Alter Self, which can be really useful if the Cambion is trying to conceal its true nature, although it does only have 3 castings per day. So that's 3 hours where it could be taking on an alias or a disguise, and the rest of the time hiding away. Also on 3 casts per day, it has Detect Magic and Command. And then as a once per day casting on itself only, it has Plane Shift. This is more of a thematic choice, and it fits better on those Cambions who are in service to other fiends, maybe travelling back and forth between the material plane and the Abyss or the 9 Hells, acting as an envoy. For its actions, the Cambion actually has a number of different options here. It carries a spear, which also deals an additional 1d6 fire damage on a hit. As a spear, this can be used in melee or it can be thrown as a ranged weapon, and it can be used in one or both hands. I interpret the presentation of this spear as the weapon attack by the Cambion being imbued with extra fire damage, just because of its nature as a fiend. I don't think it's carrying a magical spear. That's my interpretation of it anyway, and it doesn't say anywhere on the stat block that its weapon attacks are magical, so the piercing damage from the spear is just standard piercing damage. In addition to its weapon, it also has a long-range spell attack. This is a 3d6 fire ray. Unusually here, as a spell attack, you'd expect the 2-hit bonus to be based on one of the Cambion's mental ability scores. Maybe it's charisma, but on the stat block this shows as a +7 to hit. So, much like the spear, this seems to be based off its physical stats, either its dexterity or its strength, as they are both +4, and as a CR5 monster, its proficiency bonus would be +3, bringing the total to hit bonus to +7. Normally, this kind of spell attack based on a creature's stats should just be a +6. Now, I'm not sure if that's an intentional design choice or it was just an oversight when the stat block was written up. Anyway, moving on. The Cambion's last action is a fairly powerful charm effect, which can last for up to 1 day. If the charmed creature receives a harmful command like jump off this cliff, that doesn't automatically end the charm, they just get to repeat their save. This is what makes this charm very powerful. This could be, in the right circumstances, an insta-kill ability in combat. You could force a character to walk straight into a lethal hazard, for example, if they fail their save twice in a row. First to the initial effect, and then secondly when they're given that command. And if a creature does pass their save, they are then immune to that charm for the next 24 hours. Taking in the whole stat block, what's interesting about some of the Cambion's features is that despite what it says in the Monster Manual entry, their features aren't actually inherited from either of its parents. Most of the Cambion's features are actually pretty unique here and aren't on the Succubus or Incubus stat block. The only one that it shares with them is that charm action. And the Cambion is a higher challenge rating. The Succubus and Incubus is only a challenge rating 4 to the Cambion's 5. This almost implies that, like some of the half-player races, the Cambions are actually a little stronger, being a mixed heritage creature, than either of their parents are. Given what we've gone through about the Cambion, both its nature and likely behaviour, and its mechanical abilities on the stat block, how can we use it in combat? What are its optimal strategies and tactics going to look like on the battlefield? First off, just finding the Cambion is going to be difficult for the adventuring party. Between its spellcasting of Alter Self and Plane Shift, tracking down the Cambion is going to be hard. In fact, the party may not be able to confront the Cambion unless they can do it by surprise, or in a scenario where the Cambion wants to be found or seeks the party out. Maybe the Cambion wants to negotiate with the party, perhaps to make a deal. And like we mentioned earlier, the party may not know for a good long while that the bad guy they are chasing down, or who is chasing them, is actually a Cambion. They might think they're looking for a human mobster before the Cambion decides to reveal its true identity. In fact, if Alter Self is active when they finally confront the Cambion, they may not realise it's a Cambion until it's dead and reverts to its true form. All of this means that when it comes to actual combat, the fight is almost certainly going to be in an area of the Cambion's choosing. Due to its flight, plane shifting and disguising abilities, the Cambion doesn't have to fight anywhere that it doesn't want to. And it is a smart creature after all. If the party tried to lure it somewhere that would give the party the tactical advantage, then the Cambion probably won't take that bait, it will just leave. So that being said, what environment is going to be advantageous for the Cambion? Where will they want to fight the party? The one big advantage the Cambion has is its skirmish capability, especially at a challenge rating where the players probably aren't going to have access to flying capabilities yet. So it's going to want tall open spaces, either outdoors or somewhere with high ceilings. Either way, some high cover will also be beneficial. Trees, tall columns, maybe balconies, something high up that it can land on when needed, or to use for cover from ranged attacks from the players on the ground. The Cambion will also want to make best use of its dark vision, either fighting in a dark lair, perhaps underground, or fighting at night if outdoors. but just remember that the Cambian's dark vision range is only 60 feet, that's half the range of its fire ray attack. That means if it truly wants to snipe and fly and stay out of reach at maximum range, it will need some sources of light to see where the party are. But equally, that could be minions closing in on the party carrying torches while the Cambian is high up in the rafters in pitch darkness. The Cambian's charm action is going to be most powerful when there is some kind of natural hazard nearby. I expect a smart Cambian would keep something like this in their lair at all times. This could be a deep pit, a spike trap, or even a pool of lava or acid. This would be a very devious move as a DM, but charming a player and walking them straight into lava or another lethal hazard is definitely a smart move for an evil and intelligent creature like the Cambian. And with an AC of 19 and a good list of damage resistances, the Cambian can hold its own in melee. You could even swap out that spear for a greatsword or a longsword and shield to buff it up a little bit if you expect it to be mainly in melee. But given a choice, the Cambian is probably going to prefer to fight from range and let its minions do the dangerous close quarters work. And that neatly leads us on to minions and allies. What kinds of creatures might be in service to the Cambian and fight alongside it? If we ignore for the moment the fiendish connections and assume our Cambian was born and raised on the material plane, its allies are going to be mainly humanoids. Thieves, bandits, pirates, corrupted or bribed guards, whatever flavour of humanoid minions you like. It's an important point to note that the Cambian's charm action only works on humanoids. So while it may end up with other creatures and monsters working with it, it can only use that mind control level charm on humanoids, so they're more likely to be within its group of minions. But that does allow us to expand the scope a little bit to some of the monstrous races. I could imagine a Cambian as a chieftain of an orcish tribe, a pack of gnolls, or maybe a den of kobolds. As a fiend and a spellcaster, we could also give the Cambian a familiar. Something like an imp or a quasit works pretty well here. You may want to pick one dependent on the ancestry of your Cambian. An imp if its parent is a devil, or a quasit if its parent is a demon. As a creature of mixed heritage, I see it as unlikely that a Cambian would be allied with other Cambians. They are probably quite rare, at least on the material plane. But they could have plausibly gained the allegiance of other devils or demons. When it comes to demons of the Abyss, the Monster Manual entry tells us that strength and force of will are how a Cambian would gain status there. So we are probably looking at demons with lower ability scores than the Cambian that it could bully or coerce into its service. Things like the Dretch, Kazmi or the Balgura. When it comes to the devils of the Nine Hells, the doors are a little more open, as this could entirely depend on the status of the Cambian's fiend parent. If the parent was a high-ranking commander in the Nine Hells, then the Cambian could have a very powerful bodyguard, maybe even a chain devil or something like a horned devil. Whatever you go with here for allies and minions, in terms of how it impacts tactics, what the Cambian really wants is some creatures that can act as its face if it is disguising its true identity, so that's likely going to be humans or a similar humanoid race. And then in combat, something which can bog down the party members in melee, allowing it to be free to fly around and fire off its fire rays. And lastly, let's do some homebrewing. This is a variant of the Cambian that I've drawn up. Even though there are some suggestions for variant Cambians in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, I've gone through this one myself to create something new and unique. This takes elements of the standard Cambian, but imagines one of the parents as a drow, and the other as the Yoklol or the Yaklal, according to the pronunciation on the wiki. This demon already has a shape change ability that lets it take on the form of a drow, so it seems like the drow is the other natural parent to this demon. This is what I've come up with. I've called it the Abyssal Cambion, being that one of its parents is from the Abyss. And I've made it chaotic evil, as both demons and elves, namely drow, tend to have chaotic alignments. It has light armor, studded leather to be exact, which includes both its dexterity and charisma modifiers. as this version of the Cambion also has that Fiendish Blessing trait, and it's got an average of 93 hit points. I've given it a climbing speed along with the Spider Climb trait. As you can see in the new artwork here, this Cambion can change forms just like the Yaklal, and it can adhesively stick to surfaces to climb around, as its skin is covered in this sort of slimy, sticky ooze. For its ability score array, I've copied its Fiendish parent but increased its dexterity to reflect its drow parentage, as well as increasing its charisma a little bit to make the most of that Fiendish Blessing trait. As the base Cambion is also proficient in a number of skills and 4 total saving throws, I've maintained those here as well, although I've swapped out the saving throws for those of its Fiend parent: Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom and Charisma. In terms of resistances and immunities, again I've copied the base Cambion, but also granted immunity to poison, as that Yaklal is immune to poison too. It then has Dark Vision to an increased range of 120 feet, which both of its parents have, along with the Abyssal language of its Fiend parent, then Elvish and Undercommon, the languages of the Drow. Like the base Cambion, this variant also has some spellcasting. I've given it Detect Thoughts and Alter Self at will. Not only does this allow the Cambion to be a great infiltrator, no longer limited by the 3 Alter Self castings per day, but it also allows them to read service thoughts of pretty much any creature it comes across without having to force a saving throw. There's a lot of interesting roleplay situations the Cambion could get into with this ability, maybe as a trader of secrets or master of spies. Once again, it then has plane shift on itself only, the same as the base Cambion, in case it needs to travel back and forth to the Abyss. And then I've also given it once per day a casting of Darkness, like its Drow parent. We've covered some of its traits and abilities already, but also included here is Sunlight Sensitivity and Fey Ancestry inherited from its Drow parent, and Magic Resistance and Shape Changer inherited from its Fiend parent. The base Yaklal can turn into a kind of mist, so to maintain something similar, with this version of Shape Changer, our Cambion can turn into a puddle of ooze to slip through cracks or underneath doorways. Okay, let's move on to actions. I've given this Cambion a Poison Spit attack to replace the Fire Ray of the base Cambion, and then I've swapped out the Spear for a Short Sword to make it a bit more thematic for a creature posing as a Drow. And like the base Cambion, it can multi-attack with either of those options twice. Finally, as this homebrew is mostly just a mishmash of 2 existing creatures, I've added one new signature ability here as a reaction. This plays on the idea that this Cambion would have Detect Thoughts active pretty much all the time, and imposes disadvantage on an incoming attack, as though the Cambion can read the creature's mind and anticipate where the strike is going to come from. And there we have it, a variant of your standard Cambion with more of an abyssal flavour to it. And it could also act as a bit of a template if you want to create your own Cambion based on any of the demons or devils in the monster manual. Overall, this one still calculates as a challenge rating 5 monster, but I would say this one is on the stronger end of a 5, particularly looking at its defensive capabilities because of that magic resistance. In terms of setting, I imagine this version of the Cambion running some kind of underdark criminal syndicate, maybe even trying to infiltrate noble drow houses to establish itself as a ruler. I'll add the links to the description below for where you can find this stat block if you'd like to use it for yourself. I hope you've all enjoyed this one. If you have, remember to hit that like button and to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in the future. And let me know in the comments if there are any particular monsters that you'd like to see on the channel next. Cheers everyone, thank you for watching, I will see you next time.